31-year-old Ohio woman Judy Malinowski was burned alive at a Gahanna gas station by her boyfriend on August 2nd of 2015 and later testified in the criminal trial against him. On the day in question, an altercation erupted between Malinowski and her boyfriend, 40-year-old Michael Slager. The former reportedly threw a soda at the latter. Surveillance footage revealed that the man responded by dousing her with gasoline before setting her on fire with a lighter. After 95% of her body was burnt, Malinowski went into a coma. Meanwhile, authorities worked on building a case against Slager, who had a criminal record with offenses ranging from theft and stalking to child endangerment and domestic assault. The man was later charged with aggravated arson and felonious assault. 7 months later, Malinowski woke up from the coma and she started to record her testimony, speaking from her hospital bed with missing hair, skin, ears and fingers. Malinowski talked to her lawyer and even to the attorney representing Michael Slager. In June of 2017, the woman died from organ failure. The Franklin County Prosecutor Office consequently pursued aggravated murder charges against Slager. Malinowski's videotaped conversations were admitted into the murder trial. Slager ultimately pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. According to The Independent, Malinowski's posthumous testimony prompted a historic development within Ohio's court system, allowing a murder victim to testify at their own trial. Number 6. Ana Ramirez. Moments before succumbing to her stab wounds on June the 22nd of 2019, 27-year-old Ana Ramirez named her twin sister as her killer at approximately 5:40 a.m. on the day in question. Police in Camden, New Jersey were called to the Centennial Village apartments on East State Street. Upon the officers' arrival, they found Ana outside the apartment building, lying on the ground with a wound to the left side of her chest. The victim was immediately taken to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead an hour later. In the immediate aftermath, a witness came forward and told detectives that Ana had been outside the building fighting with her twin, Amanda. The witness, a neighbor, claimed to have seen Amanda retrieving a knife before telling her sister, "Watch what I'm going to do." The witness immediately hurried downstairs and heard Ana crying, "Amanda, you stabbed me," before she passed out, eventually perishing from her injuries in the hospital. Amanda was arrested and booked into the Camden County Correctional Facility on a charge of aggravated manslaughter. On September the 5th, she pleaded guilty, admitting that a fight broke out between her and Ana during the incident. However, Amanda claimed that she couldn't remember what had fueled their confrontation because she was intoxicated after drinking so much. She maintained that it was never her intention to kill her twin. In the end, Amanda was sentenced to 6 years behind bars. Number 5. Matthew Pike. After being stabbed 86 times on September the 19th of 2008, 20-year-old Englishman Matthew Pike wrote his killer's name in his own blood to alert law enforcement. In 2006, Pike met 19-year-old Joanna Witten through online gaming. The two eventually became a couple and moved in together in Nottingham. The pair developed a major interest in a particular game called Advance Wars, which prompted them to create a chat forum where other players could discuss strategies. One user, later identified as David Heiss, started conversing with the couple in 2007. Apparently, the 20-year-old from Frankfurt, Germany, developed a deep interest in Witten. He added the woman on Facebook and started to leave her hundreds of messages daily, some of which presented the idea of visiting her in person. Records indicate that Witten never gave their address, but in June of 2008, she and Pike came home to find Heiss standing on their doorstep. The man claimed he didn't have money or a hotel reservation. They allowed him to stay for a few days, during which Heiss allegedly hinted at Witten for intimacy. He wrote her love letters, asking her to leave Pike. After his failed attempts, he went back to Germany, but 2 months later, he visited the couple again. This time, they turned him away. On September the 19th of 2008, Heiss forced his way into the apartment and killed Pike. A few hours later, Witten got home from work and found a blood trail leading into the living room. As she followed the trail, she stumbled upon Pike's lifeless body. Beside his gaming computer, he had written the letters D, A, and V. Witten told investigators that she believed he had started spelling out David Heiss. 5 days later, police were able to extradite the suspect back to the United Kingdom for questioning. Heiss admitted to having killed Pike, but insisted it had been in self-defense. In May of 2009, Heiss was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years. Number 4. Amarit Chan. On February the 13th of 2003, 45-year-old millionaire Amarit Chan from London, England, disappeared. 2 days later, his entire family also went missing. His wife, 23-year-old Nancy, their 2 infant sons, and Nancy's mother, 51-year-old Charanjit Kaur, vanished altogether from their Hounslow home. Their disappearance was initially considered a likely case of Amarit deciding to evade the police and tax authorities in the United Kingdom and fleeing to India. However, in April of 2003, Amarit's body was found floating near Bournemouth Pier. In the same area, Nancy's body was also recovered 3 months later. Her mother's body was later found in a bay off the Isle of Wight. However, the bodies of Amarit's 2 infant sons still hadn't been found. After Amarit's body was retrieved, investigators found that one of his socks contained a letter addressed to convicted drug dealer Kenneth Regan and dated February the 12th, which was the day before he disappeared. Prosecutors believed that Regan had killed Amarit so he could seize control of the businessman's freight company and use it to import drugs. They also suspected that the Chan family were kidnapped from their home, murdered, and buried on an estate in Tiverton. After a while, Regan and 2 accomplices allegedly dug up the bodies and dumped them at sea. In August of 2003, Regan was arrested in Ghent, Belgium, and brought back to England to stand trial. His accomplices William Hornsey and Peter Rees were also taken into custody. In July of 2005, 55-year-old Regan and 52-year-old Hornsey were found guilty of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and murder. They were both sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 39-year-old Rees was convicted of 1 count of murder and assisting an offender. He also received a life sentence, but he could be eligible for parole after serving 23 years. The note that Amarit had carried in his sock turned out to be the vital piece of evidence investigators needed. Number 3. Antonella Fidia. A message which had been written in blood by a murder victim prompted Italian authorities to reopen a murder case that had gone cold for more than a decade. In December of 1993, 43-year-old Antonella Fidia was found dead with 23 stab wounds at her home in Catania, Sicily. Several individuals, including her 43-year-old husband Vincenzo Enzo Morici, were suspected of killing her. However, with the lack of evidence, no arrests were made. None until the case was reopened in 2006 after new technology revealed information from existing photos of the crime scene. A digitally enhanced image of blood marks on the sofa where Fidia's body was adjacent revealed that the marks spelled out the letters ENZ. According to prosecutors, Fidia was allegedly killed off with a surgical cut to the jugular before she could finish writing her husband's nickname, Enzo. Morici, who'd worked as a surgeon, was arrested in March of 2007. His lawyers said that they'd fight the charges, noting that the murder weapon was never found and the sofa had long since been destroyed. 4 years later, Morici was acquitted after it was determined that the prosecution's entire argument lacked a real motive and was based entirely on conjecture and evocative elements. Subsequent information indicated that Fidia's murder remains unsolved, but nobody is doubting that she was pointing out her killer in her final moments. Number 2. Asar Rani. Harrowing footage captured in Kohat, Pakistan, showed the moment a dying woman named her alleged killer. Asar Rani, who was in her 20s, was shot 3 times after she stepped out of a rickshaw on January the 27th of 2018. The footage purportedly showed Rani in a local hospital naming the shooter as Mujahid Afridi, aged 24. The following night, Rani succumbed to her injuries. Rani's family claimed that Afridi had asked Rani to marry him. After being rejected, the man allegedly made threats and lay in wait outside Rani's residence with his brother on the day of the shooting. After the shooting, Afridi fled to Saudi Arabia and was later arrested in the United Arab Emirates in March of 2018 before being extradited to Pakistan. In June of 2021, the man was sentenced to death after he pleaded guilty to the shooting death of Rani. On top of the death sentence, he was also fined $1,800. When Concealing Evidence Goes Wrong is tuned up right after number 1, in case you haven't seen that one yet and would like to watch some more still. Number 1. Teresita Basa. This case is a little more out there than you are used to from us, but it was too fascinating not to include. In Chicago, Illinois, the fire department responded to the Pine Grove Avenue apartments when residents reported smelling smoke in the building on February the 21st of 1977. When firemen traced the source of the smoke, they discovered the lifeless body of 48-year-old Teresita Basa, a native Filipino. Her naked and partially burned body was covered with a mattress and a butcher knife was lodged in her flesh. Investigators initially believed she had been the victim of a random assault, but her autopsy results proved otherwise. At first, evidence recovered at the crime scene wasn't enough to point at any suspects, except for a note that read, "Get theater tickets for AS." Meaningful developments came about 6 months later, when a couple who were employed at the same hospital that Basa had also worked at talked to the police. Jose Chua and his wife, Ramirez, claimed that they were initially reluctant to talk to the police because they thought no one would believe their story. Jose said that after Basa's death, his wife had been entering a strange trance a number of times. During these alleged incidents, Ramirez would speak in Filipino and claim that she was Teresita Basa. Jose said that at one point his wife began naming another co-worker, 31-year-old Alan Showery, as Basa's murderer. While in the trance-like state, Ramirez further stated that Showery was in possession of some of the dead woman's jewelry, a piece of which he had given to his girlfriend. After that evening, Ramirez's condition started getting worse. Jose told detectives that whenever his wife would return to the trance-like state, she was adamant that she was Basa and that she'd been murdered. At first, the detectives were skeptical, but later they searched Showery's apartment and found the jewelry that belonged to the victim. They also found out that a pearl cocktail ring that allegedly belonged to Basa was indeed in the possession of Showery's girlfriend. In August of 1977, Showery was arrested on suspicion of murder. His attorney, William Swano, later filed a motion to dismiss the charges, arguing that Ramirez faked the trances. During the pre-trial hearing, Swano asserted that the defendant's arrest was illegal because police lacked probable cause for his guilt. Police homicide investigator Joseph Stachula acknowledged that Jose and Ramirez's story was the only lead they had when they questioned Showery. However, Stachula said that Showery voluntarily went to the police station without asking whether he was under arrest. The judge denied the defense motion to dismiss the charge, saying that whether police believed the couple's claims or not, they had to check it out. Subsequent information indicated that Showery admitted to the crimes and was sentenced to 14 years behind bars. He ended up only serving 5 years after being granted parole in 1983. Basa has gone into history as being the only woman who served her own murder from the grave. Number 7. Evan Collins. In the early hours of January the 20th, 2019, Megan Crilly was crossing an intersection with 3 friends in Linden, New Jersey. Seemingly out of nowhere, she was mowed down by a red Jeep Grand Cherokee. Despite the severe impact of the crash, The driver never broke stride either before or after hitting Crilly. According to investigators, Crilly ended up 140 feet from where she was hit. She was hospitalized with spinal cord injuries, shattered bones, a lacerated liver, and internal bleeding. Doctors ultimately had to remove her spleen. The 35-year-old elementary teacher managed to hang on for 11 days before eventually succumbing to her injuries. Almost 2 months after the accident, detectives were able to trace the Jeep's battered bumper to a salvage yard in Pennsauken, New Jersey, about 70 miles from the scene of the crash. The battered bumper was then traced back to a 39-year-old mechanic by the name of Ibn Collins. Collins was celebrating his 39th birthday and had been drinking leading up to the hit and run. On his drive home after the crash, he drove straight to his own auto body shop in Westfield, about 7 miles from the scene, where he hid his red Grand Cherokee from prying eyes. During the time that authorities were looking for the perpetrator of the hit and run, Collins had been ordering replacement parts for his car and had slowly been chipping away at the repairs, telling everybody who asked that he had hit a deer. After his arrest, Collins was hit with charges that included manslaughter, hindering, and evidence tampering. He is facing up to 30 years in prison. Number 6. David Aandi. A suspected dealer was arrested on October the 21st, 2014 in Tunbridge, Kent, England. David Aandi was a passenger in a black MG sports car when it was pulled over by police. After they were tipped off that Aandi had been dealing, Aandi refused to have an intimate search, which police wanted to perform since they believed he'd hidden his stash in his body. Upon refusal, officers took him into custody and he was placed in a cell under constant supervision to wait for nature to take its course. When he refused to go to the toilet, police had to eventually apply for extended detention powers. Akandi's floodgate opened after 3 weeks. Once they did, police found 24 wraps of cocaine, and Aandi was charged with possession with intent to supply cocaine. In 2015, he was sentenced to 7 years in jail. Detective Constable Jeremy Taylor reacted to the verdict saying, Aandi has lied throughout about his involvement, despite the overwhelming evidence we have been able to show. He had mistakenly assumed that if he waited long enough, he would be released from custody with little or no evidence to charge him. His arrogance and deceit, together with a previous history of convictions for drug supply, have resulted in a substantial prison sentence. The sentence, as well as the indignity Aandi has put himself through whilst in custody, should serve as a severe warning to anyone planning to deal in Tunbridge Wells. Number 5. Takahiro Shirashi. Between August and October of 2017, 9 people, mostly young women, were murdered in Zama, Japan. Police were investigating the disappearance of a 23-year-old woman when they discovered that she'd been communicating on Twitter with an individual by the name of Takahiro Shirashi. When they raided his apartment, police discovered 2 heads inside a cooler at the entrance before making their way into the apartment and discovering 7 more. Shirashi had hacked the 9 bodies up into a total of around 250 pieces, a large portion of which he had thrown out with the trash after covering them in cat litter in an attempt to disguise them. All of his victims were between the ages of 15 and 26, and Shirashi declared that he'd been wanting to fulfill his fantasies on the victims without having to worry about them denying his advances. On the 1st of October 2020, Shirashi pled guilty to 9 murders, and on the 15th of December 2020, he was sentenced to death. He's indicated he will not appeal his sentence. Number 4. Destiny Nixon. Shortly after midnight on December the 26th, 2016, 17-year-old high school senior Tariq Roberts was crossing the intersection of West Tennessee Street and Appleyard Drive in Tallahassee, Florida, when his silver Honda was struck by a red Chevrolet running a red light. Roberts died at the scene. According to the Tallahassee Police Department, the red Chevrolet had not only ran a red light, but had also been traveling at a high speed. According to the TPD, crash data showed that the driver of the Chevrolet, 24-year-old Deontay Johnson, was driving at 122 miles per hour before the accident. and was recorded at 91 miles per hour, a half second before impact with Roberts' car. After impact, Johnson and his passenger, Christian de Beek, fled the scene on foot. Later that night, Johnson, accompanied by his girlfriend, Destiny Nixon, checked himself into Capital Regional Medical Center, telling staff that he had hurt himself in a fall. Doctors were informed by police to keep an eye out for someone with injuries consistent with the driver of the red Chevrolet, and they quickly informed local authorities. The police then started interviewing Johnson and asked him where his clothes were so that they could impound them and book them into evidence, to which Johnson replied that he had no clue what happened to them. At some point, Nixon, the girlfriend who had accompanied Johnson since checking in, started leaving the room. When officers noticed that her jacket, which had previously been unzipped, was zipped up, officers confronted her, but she turned away and tried to go into a treatment room. When asked what she was hiding in her jacket, she replied nothing, as Nixon turned away again. Officers said that they saw some gray fabric sticking out from beneath her jacket, noting that the suspect had previously had on a gray t-shirt. Police said that they were certain that Nixon was trying to hide and remove potential evidence. They arrested Nixon and further found 2 black socks hidden in her purse. All of the recovered pieces contained grass and glass fragments. Johnson was eventually convicted of vehicular homicide, failure to render aid, and leaving the scene of a crash involving death. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison. It is unknown what punishment Nixon received for her attempts to cover up his crimes. Number 3. Khabib Jackson. In October of 2020, 30-year-old British man Khabib Jackson from Bedfordshire was seen on CCTV footage heading towards the home of his ex-girlfriend and mother of 2, Louise Rump. Jackson had been wanting to rekindle their relationship ever since the two had broken up a year earlier, something Louise had no desire to do. Jackson had somehow arranged for her to perform a pole dance for him on that fatal night. Shortly before or quickly after the dance started, the events took a turn for the worse. Jackson strangled his ex-partner in a fit of anger that was later identified by a judge as driven by jealousy, rage, and an element of frustration. After the killing, he set her body ablaze in a deliberate attempt to destroy traces of his attack. He was later seen discarding a blood-stained jumper and a cardboard box not far from the scene before driving off. Shortly after the incident, Jackson went to his place of work in Houghton Regis, where he concealed clothing and one of Miss Rump's mobile phones in a bin. His attempts of concealing evidence proved futile, and Jackson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years served. Number 2. Nadia Voni. In March of 2014, 42-year-old Nadia Voni was caught red-handed while trying to cover up her car with a tarp in Pompano Beach, Miami. A short time earlier, she had been traveling northbound in her Ford SUV on North Federal Highway. She was trying to turn left onto Northeast 4th Street and turned on a solid green traffic light into the path of southbound traffic. Benjamin Pirovsky, aged 30, had been traveling in the opposite direction and was crossing the intersection on his own solid green traffic light. Upon realizing Voni was about to cut him off, he still tried to brake, but ended up hitting the back of Voni's car and was ejected from his bike. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Voni, who was later found to be drunk, never broke stride and drove straight home, where she tried covering her car up with a piece of tarp. While in the process of doing so, police, who had been tipped off by a witness who followed her home, arrived at Voni's home. She was arrested at the scene and charged with DUI manslaughter, leaving the scene of a crash with death and tampering with evidence. In 2016, she was sentenced to 11 years behind bars. Number 1. Nancy Ann Kissle. The case of the Hong Kong Special Administration Region versus Nancy Ann Kissle is widely regarded as one of the most high-profile criminal cases involving an expatriate in Hong Kong's history, if not the most. In 2003, Nancy Kissle was 28 when she killed her husband Robert, a 40-year-old investment banker. Kissle was convicted of murder in 2005, but her conviction was overturned on appeal in 2010 before she was again found guilty in a retrial in 2011 and sentenced to life in prison. In the months leading up to the murder, Kissle had been having an affair with Michael Del Priore, the Kissle's electrical repairman,
who'd rewired their home in Vermont. The affair occurred during a return trip by Nancy from Tokyo to Vermont. After the short-lived affair, the two remained in frequent touch via telephone. Robert sniffed out the affair and hired New York private detective Frank Shea to spy on his wife. Additionally, he secretly installed spyware on her computer. According to Nancy, when Robert's suspicions were confirmed, he claimed to have initiated proceedings for divorce and for custody of their children in response to alleged physical abuse and the alleged threat of having her children taken away from her. Nancy laced a strawberry milkshake with sedatives before having their 6-year-old daughter bring it out to Robert. After the cocktail of sedatives had taken effect, and after the children left the apartment, she bludgeoned Robert to death. She then rolled up his body in a carpet and hid it in the storeroom of their apartment complex. Kissle went on to buy new bedding, cleaned bloodstains, and ordered boxes from a moving company to pack up the evidence after she smashed her husband's skull, all in an attempt to hide evidence and cover up the murder. Before her conviction, she stood to inherit her husband's estate worth $18 million. But because of her direct involvement, she's now spending the rest of her life behind bars in a Hong Kong prison instead.
Thanks for watching. If you were to be murdered by someone, would you rather the killer got a life sentence or the death penalty? Let us know in the comments section below.